We thank you very much for coming and taking up your time to honor our invitation. We feel that participation in the work of the TRC is a patriotic honor-taking, and all of those who have agreed, all of those who have participated and support this worthy cause deserve to be patriotic citizens. So thank you. I will use this time to introduce commissioners here present to you. Following that, kindness, make a brief statement about yourself before we proceed with your testimony. You may choose to remain seated, you may stand, in whichever fashion you choose to make your presentation. At the far end of my right is Commissioner Sheikh Togba-Nah. Next to him is Commissioner Sila. Next to her, Commissioner Ram. Immediate at my right is Commissioner Tipoteh. On my left, immediate is John Stewart, Commissioner, and Commissioner Jeremy Coleman. I'm Jerome Radio, Commissioner Washington. Thank you, sir, and welcome again.
Oscar Jaikia, our friends and partners from abroad, fellow Liberians. I was born in Monrovia on July 17, 1941. This makes me 67 years of age, with parentage from Sino and Grand Cru counties. My father was a professional accountant, but due to the great need of the Methodist Church for preachers, he managed to do his accounting work while preaching from the pulpit. My mother was very active in the church while serving as a school teacher and a nurse. What I would like to do, Mr. Chairman, in response to your request, is to first put out the influences, the main influences on my public work. This is work over the past 40 years. The main influences on this work and how I have been able to use these influences to work with as many persons as possible in Liberia and out of Liberia with respect to attending to the long-standing basic problems of our country. Then I will proceed to making some suggestions as to how the Truth and Reconciliation Commission can finalize its work. In my public life, I have been informed first by the very poor conditions that I grew under. We took bath before going to bed, but as we did not wear shoes, we got up in the morning with blood under our feet because rat had bitten our feet. As we did not go to bed we didn't have slippers or so to wear. After taking bath, we just walk on the floor, and we went to bed with dirty feet. And so it was a usual sight for people to see us tying some cloth on our feet, or walking like we're walking on hot fire coal, because things were that difficult. And we slept 2 or 3 in a bed, because we didn't have enough beds in the house. Sometimes we slept on the floor. Then, of course, further in my upbringing, I witnessed a situation as I traveled outside of Monrovia. I'll just mention one in particular because of time. A situation where people who had no money but were living in huts were asked to pay the hut tax. And because they did not pay the hut tax, the men, the head of the family, usually a man, was brought to the government center in that area. She was a tax collector, followed by a member of the Armed Forces of Liberia. Used to be Liberian Frontier Force and later Armed Forces Liberia. And generally, not all the time, but generally, that person will be tied and put into a king jar. And this would be late morning, early afternoon, and blood will be coming from that person. The wife and children will be crying. And then late in the afternoon, he will be, if there's a river nearby, and usually there's a river nearby, be tied up, thrown in the river, body all heated up, and brought back again. Of course, the wife and children will say, well, we give him up because he's going to die, but they bring him up again. So then, this particular situation had a great impact on me, because I observed that there were people in the city who were making money and not paying taxes. Not all of them, some were paying taxes, but generally again, they were, excuse me, they were making money but not paying taxes. And so, as someone who had gone to school and studied what is known as economics, which is the science of allocating, moving around the resources that God's given us within a certain time, and trying to look at the best cost situation possible. And we have evolved in this study a concept, an approach to taxation. There's one aspect of taxation we call repressive taxation, or regressive taxation. That means that those who have the least pay the most. And progressive taxation is those who have more pay more. And by logic then, this means that if you have nothing, you pay nothing. Because you cannot get water out of stone. And so here we were in a situation that these people living in huts were being forced to pay taxes. And of course, we created opportunities and used every opportunity to raise awareness about the injustice related to the hot tax. And I provided leadership in a successful campaign to stop the hot tax. This, of course, is just one example, but very quickly, as we want to focus on the 79 to 2003, but I need to say that I've been informed too by a government that would not allow women, all women, and all indigenous people to have the right to vote until 1951. All women and all indigenous people. Then one cannot help but mention, as we are here in the Centennial Pavilion, we have a monument here to Matilda Newport, and we enshrined in our legal proceedings a celebrative mood on December 1st that we are expected to jump off for joy, because at the interest of a few people, relatively few Liberians, thousands of Liberians got massacred. And we're supposed to jump up and feel happy about that. And a monument still stands here. We have Matilda Newport Street, Matilda Newport School. So I've been informed by all of these things. And so while I was in the United States of America doing my doctorate degree, I focused on the question of poverty and how to get rid of it, at least how to reduce this. So after my doctorate, I worked in the office of the President of the United States, called the Office of Economic Opportunity, but specifically with the Economic Opportunity office in San Francisco, first in Washington, D.C., then in San Francisco, with the poorest people there in Washington, in Western Addition, Hunters Point, where you had at Hunters Point huge rats. You wouldn't believe this. In the United States of America, you had some rats just in these public houses, public housing units they had there. So we work on that. And then, of course, having realized too from my studies that as far back as 2,508 years ago, there lived a Greek philosopher by the name of Plato. And Plato said, Mr. Chairman, that when you see a society where relatively few people are benefiting at the expense of the masses of the people, that society is bound for chaos. This is 2,508 years ago. I was also informed by the fact that the Nobel Committee is the most prestigious prize-giving committee in the world, the Nobel Prize for this or for that. That the Nobel Prize in the mid-50s for economics was given to a professor of economics known as Simon Kuznets. He's an American professor. Why did he get this Nobel Prize? He got this Nobel Prize because he said that, yes, in societies where income is highly skewed, it's the same thing that Plato said, when few people are benefiting at the expense of the vast majority, in order to render that high skewness less skewed, in order then to reduce poverty, usually takes violence. I was informed by this. And so from my religious background, and just from the sheer logic of it, if you know that these things take violence usually, there's perpetration of violence around the world, then it must be good leadership that works against violence, to find a non-violent way to them. Thereby, of course, we're influenced by Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and the works of Mandela, Luthuli of South Africa, and of course Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And in that same vein, that you shouldn't be surprised, I was just in South Africa on July 12th to pay tribute to Madiba Mandela on his 90th birthday. So I'm trying to tell you how these things all fit together. And these were influences, strong influences on my own character. Having said this, I thought it was absolutely important to engage in practical activities while doing some rhetoric, let's say research, the University of Liberia and elsewhere, and you talk about it in public, but let people know what is possible to do. Because it's mind-boggling that during the 1950s, Liberia had the highest per capita economic growth rate in the world. Next, Japan was only number 2 to Liberia. Liberia had the highest economic growth rate per capita in the entire world, better than the United States of America. But the record from the 50s showed that the situation was getting, the living conditions for most Liberians were getting worse and worse each year. Therefore, a concept evolved, Mr. Chairman, that is now worldwide from the Liberian reality known as growth without development, economic growth without development. So it really situates this concept very clearly. It's not used loosely because say that while you have this growth in income, but people are getting poorer and poorer. We'll come to that later when we look at the present day reality. So then, I founded what is known today as Susuku, the first, the oldest development NGO in the country. It's a poverty alleviating NGO. Coming from the background of working for 1 year in the United States of America in a poverty alleviating situation, and my doctoral dissertation being in the same area. So came to Liberia in 1971, set up Susuku. Now, we're there to help poor people. The war came out. The war came, and then said, well, you cannot continue to be credible helping poor people, and say, well, let the war stop, then we'll come up again. We have to be seen to be assisting people with respect to ending the war. So we set up a program with ecomog. We had close working relations with ecomog. This program is called School for Guns. School for Guns is actually a package. The package involved mainly that if you were a combatant and you come with your gun and ammunition, no questions asked, we give you food and clothing, a bag of rice and clothing that will last you about 2 years, some jeans, pants, and t-shirts on the spot. And we brought in 19,785 combatants. 82% of all the combatants were officially disarmed by February of 1997. After we did that, then we said, well, which of you would like to go to school? Who would like to go to school? Over 6,000 were sent to school. We set up 1,800 in business and sent over 3,000 for health care, mental, psychosocial, and then physical care. And our psychosocial specialist at the time was the chief government psychiatrist, Dr. Grant, Dr. Edward Grant, the late Dr. Grant. We were able to set up a center in Harbel. Harbel was chosen primarily because of the strategic area. We were working together in consultation with the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States of America. At the time, Colonel MacArthur, the Shaker responsible for Africa. I visited him. We were in direct contact. We thought Harbel would be strategic because if we were to do serious disarmament in the Harbel area, the Roberts Field airfield will open up. The plantation gets set up again, and you know we had close to 30,000 workers there, and then we'll be able to see what we could do to revive the rubber industry and improve the lives of the tappers and their relatives. So then, of course, we went into the war. We noticed, of course, that there was something we could do through Susuku about relief. So we're able to get in some partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières, and they needed a local partner, and that made it possible to get some $3-4 million to set up the Japanese Friendship Maternity Center. Then I had made some representation to the parliament in Sweden, and the foreign minister at the time, put Liberia on the map and did the same thing. It happened that I went to France, and they didn't want to hear about Liberia in France, but Radio France contact allowed me to have 15 minutes, and I spoke in French. And so the Prime Minister office called me immediately. The present Foreign Minister, Bernard Kouchner, who was founder of Médecins Sans Frontières, was in the Prime Minister office at the time. And he invited me and said, well, whatever relief you people need, just itemize them. We'll try to do so. So we're working in the relief area. Then we found there's a possibility to help with our people fleeing the country. So we use both Susuku and Moja contacts. Moja, of course, the Movement for Justice in Africa, founded in 1973 when realizing that injustices were the order of the day. And so we're able to use both of those contacts to work with the Ghanaian government and help to set up Buduburam. We got some initial funding from the Dutch, and there were just a few hundred of people there at the time. Now, of course, you know there are over 40,000 Liberians in Ghana, and close to 20,000 of them are living still in Buduburam. Now, as the war went on, especially during the Taylor years, I found out that, and there's nothing that I alone knew, others knew this as well, that the important post of a liaison, to show good faith for working towards peace, it was necessary for the government of Liberia to have a liaison officer. Here, a liaison officer that will liaise between the government of Liberia and ECOWAS. There was absolutely nobody. And the executive secretary of ECOWAS at the time, Kouyaté, who subsequently became Prime Minister of Guinea, recently he took leave of government, but he was there at the time. And we worked together to organize conferences. When I went to Abuja, I would set up office on my own, at my own expense. And of course, I was very fortunate to have the blessing of subsequently President Olusegun Obasanjo. We had become friends before he became president. Like one paramount chief he was clan chief in near Kawekan, on the way to Temple. He said, well, Tipoteh, don't jam before you get friend before you jam. So I knew President Obasanjo through our work in the Africa Leadership Forum before he became president. And so that helped to facilitate the close relationship with the ECOWAS Secretariat. And we're able then to, like, my office is here, we'll get invitations, identify people here in civil society, arrange for meetings abroad, so forth. And we had that one set of meetings. Then on another occasion, the Africa Leadership Forum had a big meeting to look at the general security situation in Africa. And so we had that meeting in Kampala, and President Obasanjo arranged for me to meet with President Museveni and President Nyerere on two aspects. One, to try to get more African troops outside of ECOWAS to come and have an expanded ecomog. Then secondly, to try to get a mediator. We're thinking that President Nyerere would have been a very good mediator, but he was really very busy. He couldn't make it, but he called President Houphouët-Boigny and gave support to what he was doing, and therefore they proceeded with the Yamoussoukro talks. And then subsequently, President Togba-Nah of Zimbabwe got made mediator for Liberia. I continued to serve as part of the Secretariat of ECOWAS unofficially. And in that spirit, when the lurid aspect of the Civil War broke up, I wrote to the then Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Wim Kok. Wim Kok had been head of the labor movement in the Netherlands, and while I was visiting professor of economics in the station in The Hague at the Institute of Social Studies, they deliberately sent him to the Institute of Social Studies to pick up some international economics, some international politics, because they wanted him to be prime minister. And that sometimes we play with things around here, but they took this deliberately and sent him there to expand his horizons. And so I got to know him. And I wrote him a letter and I said, well, there's a gentleman in Utrecht called Charles Benny, and he's speaking for a movement called LERD. And this, we must know that there's no problem between the Dutch government and people, the Liberian government and people. So we want to see this situation stop as quickly as possible. Within a week, my wife was sitting here, Fatu, and I were just driving into our Hotel Africa Road residence, and I got a phone call on my cell phone. And this person said, this is Charles Benny. Thank you for the work you do in the peace process. And let Mr. Taylor know that LERD is ready for peace talks. I immediately called somebody who plays tennis with Mr. Taylor regularly, and I called a business friend of his. Then I sent officials. So 3 letters I sent to Mr. Taylor. I said, LERD is ready. As I now stand here, there's absolutely no feedback from that letter, those letters that I sent at the time. But be it as it may, the ECOWAS secretary changed to Dr. Chambers, and Dr. Chambers was actually part of the Moja network with Professor Akilakwa Sawyer, who was Vice Chancellor of University of Ghana, Kwesi Bichu, who became Minister of Finance, and he was a student of theirs. And these Sawyer and Bichu, colleagues of mine, we worked together in a Pan-African mode, and so we established some relationship, and fortunately we're able then to use this within the ECOWAS framework to arrange some meetings, and some of these meetings, of course, were held in Abuja towards the peace process. The short of the long is that we were able then to use the network we had through Susuku Moja then to advance the peace process as best as we could. Now, I noticed that there have been considerable interventions here. I benefit from the smoothing of the path made by our good friend Oscar Jaikuya, respect to what happened in 1979. I would like to suggest that in these proceedings that we pay close attention to our conceptualization, is that defining our terms, so that because the way in which we use terms, now the term riot has been thrown around, what does the evidence show? Was there a riot? The planners said they planned a parade or demonstration. We need to be specific on that, so that because depending on the specificity of that, we'll then be able to know how to proceed. So I'd like to suggest that we take this into serious account. Having said that, working within the preventive mode, we had as chairman of the board of Susuku, late Archbishop George Brown, and my own political father in my political work in Liberia was Albert Port. We used to even be with him, helping to sell his various treatises that he was standing on street corners, and we used to help to get a mimeograph, so forth, and I learned quite a bit from him. And I know at that time that the proposal for the increase in the price of rice was made. It's a proposal at a time that the President Talbot's business interests, the largest importer and the largest supplier of rice. Now, as chairman of the Price Commission, we just gave a report to the president, and I can't divulge what's in the report. It's up for the president to say so, but suffice it to get some fundamentals in here that I think will become common knowledge, so it wouldn't be seen that I'm bridging some or showing some disrespect to the president. But and this is part of the world debate, because if you read the debate along with rising prices, even the World Bank's president comment about 100% are facing starvation, and that the role of prices on farmers, so forth. One thing stands out is that let's say you double the price of rice tomorrow. The farmer is sitting down. He or she, and most of it will be she, because it means the women that provide most of our food, will be sitting down, having problems with respect to access to land, access to land that is access to arable land, having problem with respect to farm to market roads, having problems with respect to farm tools. So those who will stand to benefit immediately are those who are importing rice and those who are large producers of rice, because it will take time for them. So I'm saying this because it's commonsensical. It will take time for them to do that. Now, Archbishop Brown, the veteran Albert Port, were among a few others who were working in a prevention better than cure mode, in a non-violent mode, and were saying, well, perhaps a commission could be formed of cabinet members and some members from the Progressive Alliance of Liberia and some other civil society organizations. They could meet in the E.J. Roy building or meet somewhere and begin to discuss these things. That option was not pursued. On hindsight now, the evidence that comes out shows that in my own work, and my work is not done singly. I'm not mentioning other people's name here, but it's widely known that I didn't work by myself. I work institutionally. I mentioned Susuku and Moja. I didn't get into the political party type things of it, but I mentioned those two so that sometimes when someone who's in politics says 2 + 2 = 4, and some people say, well, I don't think it's true. It's coming from a politician. And even little children are thinking that politicians are liars. And so that's another aspect of the problem we have. But that's why I stuck with those two organizations. But let it be said, though, that you will observe through my testimony that I consistently provided leadership to use the intellectual facilities that I've been fortunate, to get here and abroad, to provide information like 2,580 years ago, for heaven's sake. The Nobel Prize award to Simon Kuznets. How come then that in the midst of the immensity of human resources first, and natural resources, can we then continue to face the kind of dilemma with it? So we necessarily got into prevention better than cure mode, because we knew from our experience and from our studies that if left untended to, there will be violence. So that's why we set up institutions like Susuku to try to tend to poverty alleviation, Moja to say that it's only justice that brings peace. And today that Archbishop Michael Parker Francis is really the father, proponent of that point of view. And it's not just rhetoric. It's a real situation. Only justice that brings peace. So we set up organizationally. It was no accident to work on these things. And the record shows that the government's response was not favorable. In the governments of the day, the response was not favorable. And particularly when the violence broke out in 1979, the record shows that it was the Archbishop of the Episcopal Church Liberia, chairman of the Susuku Board of Directors, who got on television, radio, to address the nation because the president was incapacitated. He was indisposed. He couldn't do so. And it was Archbishop Brown who got on radio. And we participated in preparing what he did present on radio. And what did he say? The short story of that. He said many things, but he gave one story. Our African elders are very good in giving parables and story. He said there was a paramount chief who took his people hunting. And they killed an elephant. While they were coming to town, the paramount chief was singing a song. I am taking my elephant to town. The people were singing a song, another song. We are taking our elephant to town. The paramount chief continued, I am taking my elephant to town. The people continued, we are taking our elephant to town. So then the people said, but chief, aren't we one people? Why don't we say we are taking our elephant to town? The chief proceeded to saying, I'm taking my elephant to town. The people continued, persisted in singing, we are taking our elephant to town. The next time the paramount chief said, we are taking our elephant to town, the people said, Chief, here's your elephant. This was the lesson from Archbishop Francis' way of rallying the people. And in the meantime, we had used our Moja connection to reach President Sekou Touré through his ambassador here, Cissé. Got to President Sekou Touré, and he sent troops here. So what is evolving now is that we saw an objective situation that was dangerous for the nation because the highly skewed distribution of income, growth without development. We set up institutions to prevent this, make people aware, we engaged government. The government response was negative, in some cases violent. Then when things got messed up, we then participated in solving the problem, in fact saving the physical life of people who are in government. The record was showed that when the troops came, President Talbot remained in office. The troops didn't come and remove him out of office. He stayed in office. The same way we did with Charles Taylor, Mr. Charles Taylor. He was in the United States of America, in jail. I got a call from the former Attorney General of the United States, Ramsey Clark. He said, well, please help me up. I've got a client here. And the client said that you can help him to prevent his extradition to Liberia. And this is the first opportunity I had to save Mr. Taylor's life. If I had to do it again, I'll save life. Only God can take life. Who am I? Anybody, if I have an opportunity for anybody to save his or her life, I'll do so without any questions asked. So I said, well, excuse me, Dr. Amos is in jail, and really I've left Europe to come to America because the immense publicity opportunities here to try to get Amos and others out of jail. And He said, but he said, please try to assist. So what we did, we got a film on the judicial system here and smuggled it out of here. And I met with Mr. Ramsey Clark in Belgium, gave him the film. In fact, he still has it today, never returned it. And the film showed that you really couldn't have a fair trial here, for anybody, particularly that type of case. So it prevented the extradition of Mr. Taylor. Then, of course, the next time, I was senior advisor to the United Nations on the African Economic Recovery and Development. I was moving around Africa. I happened to be in Ghana, and I heard that Mr. Taylor was in Ghana. The authorities approached me and said, well, what do we do? Again, we had been close to Ghana through our respect for the work of Kwame Nkrumah. And so said, well, what do we do? There's enormous pressure on trying to send him back to Liberia. I said, well, just take a gun from one of your soldiers' side and go and shoot him. He said, why should we do that? Because I said, well, from our own estimation, he wouldn't get a fair trial there. And the record shows that he wasn't sent here. Thirdly, when I returned from the Netherlands to Liberia, and some of you may know, if not all of you, I went to the Netherlands in forced exile because I was accused of being part of the Wessin plot, the Wessin alleged plot. And so somebody tipped me off, and I say I'm not in the practice of committing suicide. When it's time for me to go, God will just say time for it. But I'm not going to take a knife or see somebody shooting me and stand in the way. So I went abroad. Then I came back after working for a peaceful space here continuously. I came back just in time for the conference. We worked very hard to get the Banjul summit held. You recall the Banjul summit that was held. But what I haven't told you so far is that President Babangida put me in prison because President Obasanjo invited me after I gone there to address the Nigerian Economic Society at the annual meetings. And I was about to leave. The president of the society got me, went to the VIP lounge, got on the plane, and then about to sit down, two security people came out and said, are you Professor Tipoteh? They grabbed me, took me back to the VIP lounge where I slept. I stayed there until about 3 o'clock in the morning. They whisked me off to the maximum detention place and put me in prison. And I was there competing with rats for space around 3, 4 in the morning. Didn't eat for about 2 weeks. And so then the press conference I had at Ota, at President Obasanjo's house, in his farmhouse in Ota, is this. He deliberately arranged, he said, well, let's try to do something to influence the Banjul summit. And the meeting came up with a peace plan that happened to be in the same peace plan that the Interfaith Mediation Committee came up with. Just get form an interim government and get all major stakeholders to take place in it. And then we then pave way for proper elections to take place. Dr. Sawyer, of course, got elected there, interim president. Then we came back to Liberia for the conference at the Unity Conference Center. And I came back at that time, and I've not left the country since then. I'm mentioning this merely to say, with the Charles Taylor situation, I mentioned the extradition situation, the Ghana situation, and then finally, I was under enormous pressure by Liberians abroad, and some at home, but mostly from abroad, to leave the country. Said that by my being in the country, Mr. Taylor could then say, well, Tipoteh is in the country, so things are not bad. Why all the criticism? So I was enormous pressure. Then, of course, at the same time, we had the anti-terrorist unit, at least 20, 25 of them around our house on Hotel Africa Road every day. And thank God I have a wife who not one day did she say, well, this thing is too scary, let's pack up and leave. And I'm glad she's here to follow these proceedings. And so, on this situation, said, well, I'll stay at home. I'll stay at home, work to get political parties together for peace. Some of you might know I became chairman of the Interest Group for Liberia, and then I became a board member of the Liberian Women Initiative, and we're all working together in the same cause to try to have a peaceful approach that will not, on any circumstance, see a situation where a president, a head of state here, is removed violently. It came very close to that while I was attending the Accra Peace Conference, and on June 16, 2003, when the the ceasefire agreement was signed, and it wasn't holding, especially the church on Sao Boso, near the Shield family compound. When I saw on CNN and the people got killed right in front of the church there, I called President Obasanjo up and I said, well, may I come? So I went, spent 3 weeks with him. We're working there to try to make sure that Mr. Taylor doesn't get killed in office here and that the war ends. How do we do it? I'm not saying that we were the only ones working, but I'm talking about what I was able to do. So the record now shows that Mr. Taylor got out. It helped to stop the fighting, and then elections took place. That we had the interim situation there with Chairman Bryan, and the preparation for election took place. So then, I'm saying all of this, and to encapsulate them, is that to say that there were certain influences on me, objective conditions that I faced growing up, influences from my parents, and then of course studies that I happened to have engaged in, and then saw the need to move straight into practical work for preventing what Professor Simon Kuznets referred to as that it generally takes violence to reduce poverty. So, well, if you have this knowledge, then why don't you use your knowledge to work the other way? And how do you find a non-violent means? It's just like finding something for malaria, finding something for AIDS, or for cure for any other disease. So a social scientist can get engaged in work as well. Not only biologists or chemists or physicists. So it's the same way we got disarmament. The women in Harbel saying, well, these are our children, and we've got 61 of them. And we got the ecomog, went across the beach, took some food and clothing. In 6 weeks' time, 2,016 of them came back. A formula was set up, you know. And it was non-violent. It worked well at that time. So we thought that we could use these methods, despite the fact that the engagement with government didn't help. It didn't help at all. And it's unfortunate that even at this day, we still have this, the automaticity between growth and development syndrome. That yes, let's grow, and the people will benefit. It has not worked for 50 years. This is why the World Bank president 3 months ago declared that 100 million persons are starving in the world, and this could lead not only to social unrest, but to civil war. The only thing he didn't say that our policies over 50 years have failed, but I'm saying that now. You see. And so we then have not gone to school, or like most of the people who haven't gone to school but got sense, will sit down with all this information and then say, well, because we want this or want that, we'll continue to make the same mistakes. I think the work of the TRC is to get the truth. And I hope I've shown that the lack of pursuing the truth has led us into war. So the pursuit of truth then must prevent war. That's why the work of this commission is so very indispensable to the way forward. Let me now close by talking about one experience I had with my immediate past bishop, Bishop Arthur Kula, who was a member of this commission. And that's precisely why I'm using this example. We would engage in a lot of things, and I would try to bluff my way, being my grandfather was a minister of the gospel, my father was too, and try to bluff my bishop, Bishop Kula, and make it look like I know a good bit of theology. He said, well, you can bluff all you can, but you'll never get more than 85% until you go to theology school and pass, you know. So we were on one thing, because, you know, there's this thing going around that you must repent before you are forgiven. So somebody must come and say, I'm sorry. So I was driving Bishop Kula one day. We're going to a school where we invited Commissioner Stewart's mother to be the guest speaker. And Bishop Kula, in fact, set up a scholarship in her honor, and peace be to her memory. A great lady, great teacher. I mean, until the week before her death, she was teaching where she was. And so we were going to the school in Barnesville Estate, and I almost had an accident, because then I just stopped on the brakes. The car moved around. It was just like this, you remember the story in physics when this man yelled and said, Eureka, when you found out the relationship between water and the weight and so forth, that when you get in water, what displacement takes place, so forth. And I said, well, I found it. And what did I find? What I found was that as a political activist, as an activist, period, I've learned to make things work. Not only to study about it, but make things work. Like we set a world record in Susuku for cost effectiveness in DDR activities. A world record. Check the UN peacekeeping records. $2 million we disarmed over by 82% of all those who were disarmed. It's a world record. They were spending $120 million in Mozambique, given the shenanigans of Renamo. So I said to Bishop Kula, I said, I have found it. And they said, well, what is it? I said, well, look, somebody has murdered. In fact, the person is a serial murderer, murdering several persons around the place. You expect that person to come and say, I'm sorry? It does not happen. It will never happen. But then if you have conceptualized that you move forward on the basis of repentance, then you will never move forward. Because that murderer will not repent. How do you get repentance to come? Because it's important. How do you get it to come? It's those of us who say we are good people. Those of us who say we are good people. Those of us who say we are religious people, come from a religious background, we must be seen to be exercising moral authority. So, you killed my mom, I got on videotape. I'll come to you and I say, well, my brother, I forgive you. No question. He said, oh, but I finished killing the man, ma. You were there, in fact. And he come to me and say, he forgave me. That begins the process. See, only when those of us who say we have moral authority and are seen to be having exercised moral authority, when we do exercise that, that's how this process begins. It will not begin in any other way. This is my own suggestion in terms of way forward. Because, you know, there's a prevalence of the view that, well, you must repent before you're forgiven. And let me now close, finally, to say that although we are not set up here to ask anybody out there that if I have offended that person, the person will come out and say, well, for me to say, all right, Musu, Tamaklo, I'm sorry, is this TRC is not set up for that. So then I will have to do it otherwise, to say that if indeed I've offended somebody, and I must have offended somebody. Why do I conclude that? Because I'm not God. Only God does not offend somebody. I'm a human being. I must have offended somebody. And when you're interacting and a problem takes place, you bear some responsibility. It might be minute, but in an interaction, in a relationship, no one person bears total responsibility. Let us put on our commonsensical cap, let us put on the scientific cap, so then, if at all, and I must have offended somebody, I beg for forgiveness. As our people say from Nigeria, I beg for forgiveness. And I want to thank you for this opportunity.